If you thought things were going back to normal, I have some bad news for you. Unfortunately, things are just starting to heat up. Let's take a look at what is going on here in the US and around the world. And more importantly, why you need to get prepared now. Now is not the time to fall back asleep and cover your eyes. Now it's time to wake up and start getting ready for what's coming ahead. So stay tuned. As the lockdown in China continues, the Chinese president has doubled down on his zero COVID policy and has forced at least 45 cities to be under strict quarantine and lockdown. None more important than Shanghai and the capital of China, Beijing. Combined, both Shanghai and Beijing have a population of nearly 50 million people. Shanghai is China's largest port city, which ships goods all around the world. During this lockdown, people have been forced to stay in their homes, and most have been unable to work for months. Some Chinese citizens in Shanghai have even been pushed to the brink of desperation and starvation, simply because their government will not allow them to venture out of their home and buy basic necessities like food, hygiene items, and water. You may not realize this, but what is happening over in China is already affecting us here in the United States. And unfortunately, guys, it's about to get worse. You see, America relies on China for almost everything now. Unfortunately, almost like we need air to breathe. Remember when you were a kid and you used to hold your breath? Maybe you could go for like a minute or two max. Well, that's us folks here in regards to Chinese imports. Another minute or two and we run out of oxygen to breathe. Imports from China are already backed up at a record pace. Cargo ships have been docked around our U.S. ports for months now, and this was all before this current forced lockdown happening right now in China. Our ports have also been experiencing a worker shortage, and most workers are grossly underpaid and they're growing weary of being understaffed and overworked. Now, in the near future, a dock worker strike has also been brewing in the background, while all of the zero COVID lockdowns continue in China. If U.S. dock workers do decide to strike, that's going to spell disaster for an already weakened U.S. supply chain. That would mean even more bare shelves and much higher prices for us, the end consumer. With tensions escalating around the world, the U.S. finds itself in a very difficult position going forward. Other world superpowers are beginning to flex their might and jockeying for position in the global order. Can you imagine if China were to stop importing goods to us here in the U.S.? I don't think that we can really understand or comprehend the magnitude of the disaster that we would face if China cut us off from their goods. Within weeks, the store shelves would be empty and they wouldn't get refilled again, folks. As world allegiances are pledged and new global alliances are being formed, that could be a real possibility for us here in the near future. China could easily replace the U.S. as its top export partner, up-and-coming countries like India and Nigeria, among others. Some may even say that this is happening subtly right now. China's zero COVID isn't making much sense, considering that the cases are extremely low compared to when the pandemic first started. Some say that these forced lockdowns are just a subtle way to further weaken the U.S. economy and eventually break all the trade ties altogether. Now, as we shift focus to other happenings around the world, we see that the conflict or special military operation is still in full swing over in Eastern Europe. As you know, the U.S. has been assisting the Ukrainians with weapons, supplies, and more importantly, with military intelligence. Under the guise of NATO, the U.S. is involved heavily in what is going on in Ukraine right now. Don't be mistaken by that fact. Not from a direct engagement, but from a proxy standpoint. However, Russia has a clear understanding of how and why the U.S. is involved with this situation. Some may say the dreaded words have already started. You see, let's say you and your neighbor are having a feud, and you learn that your other neighbor down the street is giving the other neighbor intel and insistence. Every time you leave for work, the other neighbor calls the other and lets them know that you've left. Then the one neighbor comes and trashes your yard, graffitis your house, etc. Well, with what started as a feud with one neighbor has grown into a feud with the other neighbor as well. And unfortunately, that is exactly what is happening right now with the U.S. and President Biden in regard to what's going on in Ukraine and with Russia. Now, I want to make this clear as well. I no longer have confidence in either side, whether that's red or blue, Democrat or Republican, left wing or right wing. I know that both wings belong to the same bird. You see, over the years, I've seen just how big the government has gotten and how our American way of life has gotten bleaker and bleaker. More and more Americans are living below the poverty line than almost ever before in history. So I understand that at the end of the day, the government does not care about you and I. Now, we've all seen and felt some impact of the impending food shortage that's here, folks. Now, technically, this has been going on for at least 2 years. During this pandemic, we've seen empty shelves and less items stocked on the shelves that we rely upon for our daily lives. Unfortunately, this seems to be getting worse. Now, I know it's hit and miss in some parts of the country, but that's exactly what experts are warning are the signs of a food shortage. It's hit and miss until it's totally miss. Now, as you can see as well, families with newborns are struggling right now more than ever before. This massive baby formula shortage is spinning out of control. Many parents are worried that they may not be able to feed their children, and none of this is making much sense either right now to many families, especially those that have small infants. Now, back in February, the FDA recalled Similac, Alimentum, and L-Care brands due to the baby formula being contaminated, and it was also linked to the death of at least one infant. So those brands of formula were recalled. But what about the other baby formula brands that make baby formula? Why haven't they ramped up production to meet this new growing demand for baby formula? Now, this is a question that I cannot answer, but for many families across the U.S., they want answers and they want them fast, and I don't blame them. There's no reason for this to be going on. Now, moving on to other food problems within our U.S. supply chain, let's look and see why so many farmers are quitting and leaving the farming industry. With fuel prices soaring to record highs, a massive fertilizer shortage, plus a worker shortage, on top of high prices just to input the crops, many farmers are throwing in the towel and cashing out. Now, most farmers aren't rich by any means. They make enough money to feed their families, pay off the debt from the last crop, and maybe have a little to put aside. You see, the small farmer relies heavily on loans in order to be able to get this year's crop from farm to table. Many banking institutions that offer those loans have denied those loans to small farmers, and they've increased their restrictions on those loans to the ones that they do approve. Now, essentially, they're only loaning money to farmers who can all but guarantee that their crop will be successful. But as many farmers know, here in the U.S. and around the world, but especially here in America, that's becoming harder and harder to do for most farmers. Now, right now, across the West and Midwest, that part of the country is experiencing the worst drought in 1,200 years, as experts report. Lake levels, rivers, and water reservoirs are at their lowest point that they have been on record. Many states and cities have enacted water restrictions. Now, being that the Southwest has been so dry, they're also experiencing massive wildfires right now. Everywhere from California to Kansas, New Mexico, and we've even experienced some in Florida. Thousands and thousands of acres have been burned up, and valuable farmland has been lost along with it. The drought has also forced many cattle and other livestock farmers to make tough and difficult decisions. Many farmers are choosing to cull their herds because they just don't have enough water to give their animals. And this has flooded the market, as you know, with beef. We've been experiencing chicken shortages, but beef seems to be in pretty good stock. That's because a lot of the farmers are having to cull off their herds. But also, as you've noticed, the prices of beef, instead of going down because there's more beef in the market, have went up as well. Prices are continuing to rise. Now, other parts of the country, they're also experiencing abnormally dry conditions as well, such as Georgia and Florida. And farmers all across the U.S. are getting bombarded from all sides right now, which is again why many of them are choosing to leave the industry, and many more are planning to exit in the next few years. You see, our canned foods that we buy at the grocery store typically are from last year's crop, and some of the foods that we buy are even from prior years. You see, the damage that's going to be done to this year's crops in 2022, we haven't even realized those yet. And this is unfortunately going on all around the world, not just here in America. India is seeing a record heat wave right now, which is causing severe drought and plenty of crop failures with their wheat, which they export to a lot of countries. And you know what's going on in Eastern Europe with Ukraine. They're one of the world's largest wheat producers, and they're under siege right now. So they're unable to produce their normal amount of wheat that many countries rely heavily upon each and every year to feed themselves. Also, countries throughout Africa and the African continent are also experiencing hardship and drought when it comes to planting and harvesting crops. Brazil is having a severe drought right now, which is affecting their corn crops. And back here in the United States, states like Oklahoma and Texas are dealing with very bad drought conditions. Now, that area did recently see some heavy rain, which we would normally think would be a good thing. However, the few plants that did survive the drought, they're in danger of falling over and being destroyed due to the heavy rain. They're also at risk for catching diseases and not developing the young plants that did survive. Now, recently, one Oklahoma farmer said that he thinks that the rain that did come was just a little bit too little and a little bit too late. Now, Oklahoma's wheat crop is expected to be about half of what it was last year, folks. So again, if we're basing our food and the canned foods that we buy from a store right now off of last year's crop, it's going to be even less than last year. Now let's shift to transportation and the trucking industry and see what's going on there and how that's all affecting us as well. Try to forget about all the problems that we've covered so far. And even if none of those issues existed, the trucking industry right now is experiencing a severe driver shortage. Not to mention that there aren't as many goods to haul right now with the massive backlogs from the goods being imported from China and other countries around the world. The ships are just stuck at our U.S. ports, unable to unload, as you've seen in the past weeks and months. Not to help the trucker shortage, but rising gas prices are also frustrating truckers and making their job more difficult. Once the goods finally do make it here to the U.S., if they do at all, the trucker shortage makes it harder to fill those empty shelves. As we've all noticed, gas prices have risen, and diesel prices has been no exception, rising to $5.53 on average per gallon. Now that's going to affect us as the end consumer. The truckers have to pass on those prices to the stores and to other users, and then the store passes that on to us, the end consumer. Now, according to reports here in the U.S., the trucking industry, just with last year alone, was short a record 80,000 drivers. And our goods are transported, or at least 70% of them are transported via truck freight. Now, one trucker recently said that prices are skyrocketing and he just doesn't get good prices for his loads. He said it cost him around $800 to fill up his truck each time. So imagine driving 600, 700, 800, 1,000 miles each way, and then it costs that much to fill up your tank. See, it's just not making sense anymore for them to keep on driving, spending all that time away from home and even less and less money that they're earning. Plus all the stress of being able to ensure that they get the delivery there on time, and it's just too much for them. That's why many truckers, just like farmers, are deciding to walk away from the industry. And unfortunately, I don't think we fully recognize or understand the significance that these quittings are going to have on us here in the United States. Well, that's a wrap for part 1 of this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys over on part 2. And as always, thank you for watching and be blessed.